Today's episode is for my counselors, my future counselors, and honestly, anyone who's ever wondered what's the difference between school counselors and mental health counselors. Welcome back to the Counselor HQ podcast. Today we are talking about the difference between school counselors and clinical mental health counselors, how we are alike and how we are different. And honestly, I think having been a school counselor, this question came up a lot from parents especially. So today we're diving into what these roles have in common, what makes each one uniquely chaotic, and why collaboration between the two is actually so important. So let's get into it. You know, I always like to start with a story. So when I was in grad school, I wasn't sure which track I wanted to take, school counseling or mental health counseling. At first, I was on the mental health counseling track, but then I had a chat with a professor who was talking to me about school counseling. And I guess it was just something that I didn't really know a lot about because when I was in school, there weren't school counselors. There were guidance counselors, which is very different. But when I talked to him, you know, my passion has always been helping kids. So that felt like a really natural path. Anyway, to be safe, I got certified in both. And then once I graduated, I found a job at a school. And so then I kind of let my other licensure lapse. And so for 20 years, I was a school counselor, loving it, doing all the things, but then I wanted to do more. I wanted to have more freedom. So I thought maybe if I did some mental health counseling, that could afford me a little bit more flexibility and freedom with my time. So I looked at getting recertified and renewing my license, which I realized was a huge pain in the butt, but that's a story for another episode. So anyway, I did end up getting my license to be a clinical counselor, and I even went ahead and got my LCPC, which is the next step above. Anyway, so I have done both. I am no longer a school counselor, but I still have the certification. But now I do private practice from my home. But I really think this topic is important to understand the difference and the similarities, because when I was working in the schools, we would get a lot of suggestions or different things from clinical counselors that maybe students were working with. And I just wish that there was more of a way that we could have worked together more. So maybe that's my next goal in life, is to figure out how to bridge that gap. So anyway, let's get started. School counselors and clinical counselors have the same mission, but they just work in different settings. At the core, school counselors and clinical counselors do the same thing, right? We're helping people navigate life, emotions, relationships, and challenges. Our mission is the same: support humans, improve well-being, make life feel a little bit more manageable. But the settings, completely different worlds, and I can attest to that. School counselors are operating inside educational systems that they have very little control over, I might add. Bells are ringing, schedules are shifting. A lot of them, the American School Counseling Association recommends no more than 250 students on a school counselor's caseload. That is recommended. Most states do not follow that. Most school counselors have more than 500 students on their caseload. Okay? They're working with fire drills, tornado drills, whatever other else, ALICE drills. And if you don't know what an ALICE drill is, you're lucky. But that is when they practice for a school shooter. Okay? Clinical counselors, they're in offices, agencies, private practices, working in a quieter, more controlled environment, at least on the outside. So while the mission is aligned, the environment shapes everything about how that support happens. Okay, so let's talk about the chaos, because each role has its own version of chaos. School counseling chaos can look like so many different things. You plan a small group, but now you're covering a crisis. Or a student needs you immediately, or a teacher needs you immediately, or a principal needs you immediately, or a parent is calling and needs you immediately. And somehow, you're also in charge of testing coordination or scheduling or other things that aren't counseling. Okay? It's fast paced, it's unpredictable, it's a lot of right now energy. Now, clinical counseling chaos looks a little bit different. It can be back-to-back sessions with heavy emotional content. It's holding space for trauma, for grief, for anxiety, relationship struggles. It's documentation that never ends. It's insurance issues that make you question everything. It's less visible chaos, but it is emotionally intense and it's cumulative. Okay, so now let's talk about what we have in common. Besides that mission, despite those very different environments, there is a lot of overlap because both roles require strong emotional intelligence, the ability to build trust quickly, boundaries, okay, or at least working on our boundaries, crisis management skills, and a deep capacity for empathy. And let's not forget that both roles come with burnout risks if we're not intentional about that. Different chaos, same nervous system. So what makes each role unique? Let's highlight what makes each path stand out. School counselors, you are working at a systems level. You're not just supporting one student at a time. You're impacting classrooms, school climate, family systems, academic outcomes. You're part counselor, part educator, part advocator, and over all those things, you are a professional juggler and problem solver. Clinical counselors, you get to go deep. You're walking alongside clients through long-term healing, trauma processing, identity exploration, behavioral changes. It's slower, more intentional work, but also incredibly powerful. So this is the part that I feel super strongly about. Why collaboration between these two entities matters so much. School counselors and clinical counselors are not separate worlds. They're two halves of a really powerful support system. When that collaboration happens well, students get more consistent care, families feel more supported, and counselors feel less alone. Let's imagine this for a minute. A school counselor identifies a student who needs deeper support. They connect with a clinical counselor. The clinical counselor provides ongoing therapy, but that communication stays open within ethical boundaries. That is when real sustainable change happens because the school counselor has access to that kid for like 6 to 7 hours, 5 days a week. The clinical counselor can get in deep and can really work on those difficult issues and maybe some past trauma and things that the school counselor maybe doesn't have time to. But the school counselor has that access on a regular basis. So let's break down the silos. Sometimes there is an unspoken divide, right? I've heard this so much. I've said this myself when I was a school counselor. They don't understand what I do. Okay? And I think that that is true because that communication is not there. Sometimes we don't understand what the other one is true. Or sometimes I've heard their job is easier or harder than mine. Okay? Well, if you don't know what they do, then your assumptions may or may not be true. So what is the truth? We need each other. School counselors often don't have the time for that long-term therapy. In fact, they don't, and that's not what they are designed to do. Clinical counselors don't always see the day-to-day context of a student's life. They hear what the student says when they come into their office. They hear what the parent says when they call on the phone. they sometimes don't see what's actually happening. If we're working together, then we both get the full picture. So, choosing a path. If you're listening and trying to decide which direction to go, ask yourself, do I thrive in fast-paced environments or slower, deeper work? Do I want to impact many people at once or go deeper with fewer clients? What kind of energy feels sustainable for me long term? And that was how it was for me. Like, I loved working in the school. It was fast. I never knew what a day was going to bring. I loved that, but it wasn't sustainable for me anymore. I needed to slow down. So that's when I shifted. And that's the good thing, is that you're not, your feet aren't cemented in cement. I don't know how else to say that. When you choose one path or the other, you have the opportunity to do both, or, switch up if you feel like it. It's not about which one is better. It's about which one fits you. So at the end of the day, whether you're in a school or a therapy office, you are showing up for people in moments that matter. And that work, it's powerful. It's needed. And yes, it can be chaotic, but it's also deeply meaningful. If you loved this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a counselor friend who's out there doing their best in their own version of chaos. And as always, take care of yourself too, because you can't pour from an empty cup no matter which setting you're in. And I think I'm going to do another episode on how school counselors and clinical counselors can work better together, because I really do think that's really important. I will see you next time. Take care of you.